Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com emailing address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but also as you'll see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who has asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question of doom truly is a question of doom, because it's actually a challenge. I've been challenged to answer this question by video as opposed to by email, so that, well, you'll see why in a moment. Dear Mr. Soup, they say. Mr. Soup is in quotation marks, Mr. Soup. I note with concern your closed mind. Let me explain. I recently searched for so-called pseudo-archaeology on your YouTube channel and came across a couple of videos. I found a question of doom about forbidden archaeology and your A to Z video Pseudo-Archaeology. In neither of these videos do you mention the need for plurality. Now, plurality is a fancy word for listening to other people's opinions, for taking on board alternative views on evidence or a series of observations. So it's simply a slightly fancy word. The need for plurality. You appear to be implying that archaeologists are the, capital letters, the key holders to the door of the past, and that while there may be no such thing as forbidden archaeology, there are nonetheless forbidden ways of looking at the past. Surely it is worthwhile exploring other avenues when examining the past. It is, after all, everyone's past, is it not? Kindly address this accusation publicly, so others might hear and see your squirming. Yours, Master Don. Well, I'm not going to call you Master Don, but I will call you Don. And you ask an interesting question, Don. First of all, I think it's an interesting question, not least because you're aiming it at me, and indeed at archaeology in general. I'll come back to that in a moment, but it's a strange one really to throw in my direction. But first of all, it's worthwhile asking, what is pseudo-archaeology? I have explored this in previous videos, but I'll briefly outline it for those of you who don't want to, waste finger-clicking time. Pseudo-archaeology, depending on which archaeologists you ask, can be described in several ways, but the two main ways are, first of all, pseudo-archaeology. It's a pseudo thing, it's a fake, it's a pastiche, it's a wannabe. It doesn't actually live up to real archaeology. That's what some archaeologists will say. They're just playing at being archaeologists. And other archaeologists, myself included, will say, well, actually, a more charitable way of describing pseudo-archaeology is as an alternative narrative. That is to say that people who are advocates of pseudo-archaeological ideas see it as an alternative narrative. And often these alternative narratives will directly challenge conventional wisdom in so-called mainstream archaeology, history, science and philosophy, etc. And they will often be hung around a central idea, a central key controversial idea. And this, for me, is why pseudo-archaeology and where pseudo-archaeology really actually falls down, is that often all of the efforts of a pseudo-archaeologist are to prove this idea, and usually this idea is grandiose. So, for example, aliens visited the planet and helped to build Stonehenge and the pyramids, this kind of thing. Or there's a lost civilization which was sunk many thousands of years ago just off the coast of India, this kind of thing. And all of the research goes into proving that idea. Now, this is counter completely to mainstream archaeology, to actual archaeology as far as I'm concerned, in as much as archaeologists will have a load of stuff, often having done research and excavations. What is all this stuff? And they'll start trying to interpret it. So they'll pick up things and go, look at it from funny angles, talk to their friends, their colleagues, even their neighbours, and say, what is this thing? And eventually out of that comes an interpretation, comes a narrative about the past, which is built on over the years, etc. Whereas, as I say, the problem is with pseudo-archaeology, it's all about proving the idea. So in many ways, the cart is before the horse in pseudo-archaeology. The idea already exists, and we're just trying to prove it. Whereas in actual archaeology, the idea is unknown until actually an interpretation comes forward. And this interpretation can be added to, taken away from, modified with new research, and so on and so forth. That's the difference as far as I'm concerned. However, it is undeniable that pseudo-archaeology is incredibly charismatic. Some of my earliest forays into actual sort of the archaeological world, as it were, as opposed to just having a general interest in history, were via pseudo-archaeological texts. Again, I've already said this. I think one of my dad's books, I seem to recall, was called The A to Z of Mysteries of the Planet, or Mysteries of the World, or something like that. And it looked at things like Druidism, why Stonehenge was built, the pyramids, Nazca lines. It's like a checklist of pseudo-archaeology. Atlantis, the search for Atlantis, this kind of thing. But I very quickly, as I was reading it, so I was a fairly precocious young man, I came to the conclusion, this is all well and good, it's all very interesting and all very intriguing, but it's also, as I say, it's all trying to prove an idea. There's no room for addition. There's no room for discussion. It's all about proving that central tenet, that central, all-defining concept, I guess, which is counter to archaeology. But as I say, charismatic, and often archaeologists will find their way into archaeology through actually such coffee table texts, and they'll go, "Ooh, this is very interesting," and then they'll research it more and become actual archaeologists. So that's why I think it's flawed. But one of the reasons why I think the question is flawed, Don, is that you're asking not only someone who runs a YouTube channel and a company dedicated to sharing archaeology with the public, but you're also asking this question of a profession, of a pursuit, which is nothing but certainly since its earliest years, has been nothing but seeking the opinions and ideas and interpretations of others. It is a plurality-seeking discipline. So, for example, an excellent example is Richard III. A couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with the mother of a friend of the family at Archaeosoup Towns. We're having a party. Well, there was a party we were attending. And I had a plate with a little pork pie on it. I had a cup of tea, and I was looking around, and along comes this our friend's mum, and she goes, "You're an archaeologist, aren't you?" Yes. I didn't quite know what was going to happen next. And she goes, "Tell me about Richard III. I want to hear everything. What do you think of it? What is it? A real find? Is it so on and so forth?" So we had a bit of a chat. And it all came round, actually, eventually, to her saying, "Well, actually, I grew up in Leicester," she said. And she was telling me that her mum had taken her to the car park and shown her where, as far as local people were concerned, this is where Richard III is buried. Now, that was interesting, not least because I didn't know about it, but also when you started to look into it, the whole reason why the Richard III excavation and research took place was based on this local knowledge. It was a seed of an idea. Which led into people researching its plausibility, and then eventually led to a documentary, and then led to an excavation, and then led to a full, global revealing earlier this year. But all of this came from a so-called layman's or lay people's idea. This seed was carried by people through word of mouth, and in that sense, that archaeological find wouldn't exist were it not for the ability to listen to others and indeed value their opinions. Craftspeople, experimental archaeologists are often lifesavers when it comes to interpreting objects, and especially objects which are a bit odd or almost unique. The number of finds that you read about having been incorrectly interpreted for a long time, and having had a label which says this was used for making cheese, when in fact it was actually a mechanical tool or something, which comes to light. This sort of game changer, as it were, happens all because someone comes along and goes, "I think you'll find if you turn it upside down, yeah, that's it, and then just switch it a bit around that way, it's a different object. It's not for making cheese. It's actually look, watch." And again, that all comes from plurality. It comes from listening to the opinions and the life experience of other people. Archaeology and archaeologists are actually very good at doing that. Alternative research. I mean, the key example here is Stonehenge. Almost every other month you have a new interpretation of Stonehenge come out. And yes, I do slightly roll my eyes whenever I read a new one, but nonetheless they're worthwhile reading. worthwhile listening to. Some of them you will go, no, that's been disproven by previous research. That's not the case. But others are very interesting. For example, sound effects, the way that sound travels through monuments, this kind of thing. The only thing that bothers me there is the fact that everyone focuses in on Stonehenge. It's all about Stonehenge, as opposed to other Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments, the hundreds and thousands of them that we have in Northern Europe. But once again, these ideas are listened to, they're given credence, and yes, they'll be dismissed if they are not worthwhile taking any further. But they are nonetheless entertained, and the best ones become fascinating new studies. Women. That's an excellent one. Women in archaeology. I mean, the archaeologists, archaeology rather, was one of the first professions to start accepting and listening to the perspective of women. Now, this may not sound all that remarkable today, but some of the earliest and some of the best early archaeologists, proper archaeologists, were women. They were the students of some of the pioneers, and they brought with them ideas such as applying feminism, applying a maternal or not just maternal but also a female perspective on archaeology, the idea of the house, domestic life, challenging male ideas of domestic life. Reinterpreting objects so that they're not weapons, they're actually tools. Taking artifacts which are, again, have a big question mark on them in excavations, and saying, well, actually, if you're a woman, this is a very useful object. You can use it in this way, or you can do that. Or women. That's for me one of the biggest pluralities that are out there, and archaeology was a forerunner when it came to listening to the opinions of women and accepting that actually other perspectives, non-masculine perspectives, are crucial. And finally, the whole reason for ArchaeoSoup. One of the reasons why I started doing this YouTube channel, but then also started up a company which is basically about trying to tell the public about archaeology, sharing ideas, encouraging discussion, encouraging new ideas to come forward through that discussion, is because I believe passionately that pluralism is the way forward. Forward. It is the way that archaeology will thrive and survive, not least in a time of austerity, when the best way to ensure archaeology's survival is actually to demonstrate its relevance to modern society and how we can learn from it and how we can make life better today through it. But also it's just that sense of what is the purpose of archaeology if not to inform people about their past. As you do say quite rightly, Don, it is everyone's past after all. And what's the point of archaeology if you're not sharing it with others and also listening for what people say and have to say and what they think about those ideas? Now, it's worthwhile very briefly conceding that yes, archaeology and archaeologists have been guilty of a sort of post-Enlightenment arrogance. The idea that everything can be reduced down to a scientific, so-called positivistic sort of perspective. The idea that if it can't be proven using, graphs and tick boxes, then it doesn't exist. Archaeology has had to accept that there are other ways of interpreting evidence which isn't based on purely a scientific perspective. For example, social connotations linked with a site leading it to be abandoned. This is one of my favourite examples. You can't see a social event. You can't see in the past, for example, where someone's son was tragically murdered, and therefore people abandoned this perfectly usable site for camping or for a hunting ground or for even a settlement. You can't see that, and therefore yes, we've had to accept that not everything is measurable in a scientific sense, but also logistics as well. The idea that you can map out in the landscape. Well, obviously logically, this is where you'd want to have a hunting camp. It doesn't necessarily work like that, and so these ideas have been challenged over the past few years. Or the past few decades. But I suppose actually that just goes to underline my key point, and that is that archaeology and archaeologists are forever questioning themselves, forever listening to new ideas, forever challenging each other, and indeed accepting challenges from others to hone down a better form of archaeology. So yeah, while, can level that criticism, this sort of closed-minded positivism. At the same time, archaeologists are also at the forefront of breaking that down, or more to the point, honing down their criticisms to be useful, as opposed to just being dismissive of whole swathes of good work. And a final note, as far as I'm concerned, is just to say that pseudo-archaeology can be dangerous. You'll notice when you go to the Questions of Doom playlist on the Archaeosoup YouTube channel, there is a video missing. It says at the top, there's a video deleted from this playlist. That was because, actually, I was harassed, horrendously harassed, me and Mrs. Soup, by folk who were convinced that their pseudo-archaeological ideas were truth. And and it got so much that I ended up actually taking that video down for my personal, or more to the point, her personal safety. But I'm going to leave the gap there so everyone knows it's there. So in that sense, pseudo-archaeology and pseudo-archaeologists at their worst can be very dangerous folk. They can be intimidating folk, and that's not good research. That's not good archaeological methodology. You accept criticism, you roll with the punches, and out of it comes a stronger hypothesis, as opposed to a central idea which must not be challenged. So yeah, that's my final note on that. So there you go, Don. Not too much squirming, I'm sorry to say. And as I say, I really must question your central premise, this idea that somehow archaeologists and archaeology is closed-minded and doesn't listen to other ways of looking at the past. Au contraire, archaeology and archaeologists are all about looking for other ways, new ways of interpreting the past, ranging from listening to women, which, as I say, at the time was groundbreaking, all the way through to listening to the latest suggestions from the public. And I think that's definitely the future of archaeology. Good research and a good listening mentality. And that is a central tenet of Archaeosoup. There we go. Thank you so much for asking the question, Don, and hopefully, I mean, I can squirm a bit if you want, squirm, but hopefully I've gone some way to explaining a little bit of the reasons behind my perspective, and also behind, I suppose, archaeology as opposed to pseudo-archaeology. And hopefully you don't feel as though I've taken the mick too much of you. You do ask a perfectly valid question. So if anyone else out there wants to add to this conversation, please do comment below, write a comment below, talk about pseudo-archaeology, the merits therein, or indeed the merits of so-called mainstream archaeology as well. Have a bit of a chat. I'm sure Don would like to have a read. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye-bye.